Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our April webinar for the Great Lakes Green Chemistry Network and the Michigan Green Chemistry Clearinghouse. I'm Lynn Katz-Cherry with the Great Lakes Green Chemistry Network, and we also have Clinton Boyd from the Michigan Green Chemistry Clearinghouse. We're really pleased to have you all here today, and we're sorry about the abrupt change in speakers, but I think you're going to be really interested in what Allie has to say, and we really cannot thank her enough for stepping in at the last minute with this terrific presentation from BioAmber, who is probably one of the best known new startup companies in in terms of using the principles of green chemistry. So the name of our presentation today is BioAmber, an industry perspective on the current policy landscape. And for those of you who are not familiar with BioAmber, Allie will go into a little bit about the history, but we just want to point out that it is a recipient of the 2011 Presidential Green Chemistry Challenge Award in recognition of its industrial biotechnology platform to manufacture bio-based succinic acid from renewable feedstocks. We are so pleased to have LaTourelle here today, LaTourelle Esquire, who is the Vice President of Legislative Affairs for BioAmber. She has, her work at BioAmber includes advanced manufacturing project finance, government incentive analysis, chemical and economic policy development, and she is currently heading sustainability at BioAmber worldwide. She is an attorney, an accomplished clean tech private and equity investment consultant, former licensed investment advisor specializing in sustainable business metrics, and a former sustainable business owner herself. She is a regular speaker at green chemistry conferences and has been asked to testify before state and federal congressional committees in support of increased chemical safety regulation, which is not always what you expect to hear from somebody in business. So again, we thank you, Allie, for stepping in and doing your presentation today, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Lynn. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. It looks like we have a good group of about 50 people on today, so that's exciting. Thank you so much for the introduction, Lynn. That was very nice. I hope in hearing that I'm an attorney and was also an investment advisor on Wall Street that I didn't see anybody drop off on the attendee list, but that was your chance. But I do mention that to say that it kind of gives a bit of an understanding of my perspective on the policy landscape in this discussion, and that it's very data-driven. We approach policy not from, the angle that you might expect from an environmentally clean technology company. We really look at it as a way to drive business and reduce risk within our business. So with that sort of grounding in the perspective, really what's different when I think about green chemical policy, and what amazes me is how we expedite the industry to commercialization and application. It's really that we're talking about building a foundation for systemic change in the entire industry. And I think as we look at materials moving into the supply chain, we start to understand how important policy really is, and why even startup companies like ours have even a position like mine, specializing in government relations and policy. So just a little bit about our technology, not to go too far into detail. Succinic acid, as one mentioned, is a platform chemical, and that means that it's sort of a precursor or an ingredient in many different applications. It has large addressable markets in areas of packaging, food serviceware, personal care, plasticizers. This has been identified as one of the top 12 bio-based chemicals by the Department of Energy back in 2010, and has had some competition and sort of proven in the marketplace as a few different companies are entering in. We've been in what we consider to be largely commercial scale, although technically demonstration scale, production in France since January of 2010. This has enabled us to have sort of an integrated feedback loop of data and processing on that production so that we can then make process improvements when we go to commercial scale. This is the largest, we believe, the largest scale fermentation of succinic acid in the world currently. We operate at 350,000 liter capacity, and that means that those fermentation tanks are about 7 stories tall. And if you've never stood at the top of a fermentation tank and look down, you're in for, let me tell you, it's quite an experience. This is large-scale industrial production, and by no means simplistic chemical production. So a little bit about the technology. We did a life cycle analysis last year and also recently updated that analysis to give you some idea of sort of what's driving the market as it relates to policy and also as it relates to consumer demand. Our chemical production, and this is specifically for our commercial scale production, we're in the midst of building a larger scale plant in Ontario at the moment, is showing a 0.04 carbon intensity, which means it's a 99.4% greenhouse gas savings over the incumbent petrochemical succinic acid production. For energy savings, we're seeing a 56.3% improvement. And what does that really mean? You know, I mean, it's all relative, right? So I like to sort of talk about these kind of things in terms of equivalencies to a certain extent. So that really means that the CO2 emissions of a petrochemical plant is approximately, of the same size, is approximately 213,000 tons of CO2 per year. And that is essentially what it would take to sort of eliminate that amount of CO2 from the atmosphere would be 5.7 million trees, but not just 5.7 million trees sequestered. It would be 5.7 million trees grown from seedlings over a 10-year time period in order to sequester just that 1 year of CO2 emissions. So from that perspective, it's pretty dramatic in terms of the greenhouse gas savings. I think it's also fairly dramatic in terms of the energy savings. The figure that I've seen recently is that the chemical industry is fully 10% of all industrial energy use is from the chemical industry in the U.S. And so for energy savings, we're seeing a savings at a 30,000 metric ton capacity of 1.6 trillion BTU. What does that mean? Well, it means that 1.6 trillion BTU is actually about the same as 40,000 average American homes energy use per year. So the thing that, we all struggle sort of with green chemistry and cost effectiveness, and nobody in the marketplace wants to pay a green premium. But what we're seeing with policy and consumer demand is that even though that is true and you're not going to be able to succeed at commercial scale unless you have cost effectiveness, companies like Faurecia, for example, which is the largest interior auto parts manufacturer in the world, it's actually the 6th largest auto parts manufacturer globally, but for interior auto parts, they are the largest. Companies like Faurecia are actually looking at policy and creating unique performance materials that are bio-based because of it. So we recently announced just a few months ago a partnership with Faurecia and Mitsubishi Chemical. BioAmber is the exclusive supplier to this partnership, and Mitsubishi also supplies another ingredient in order to make biomass, which is this unique performance material for interior auto parts that are bio-based, and anticipated to move to 100% bio-based material. The legislation and the regulatory atmosphere that Faurecia is really looking at in terms of the auto parts, which I think is appropriate sort of for the Great Lakes region, is really looking at the legislation and the regulatory atmosphere that Faurecia is really looking at in terms of the auto parts, which I think is appropriate sort of for the Great Lakes region, is is they're looking at the EU reducing fuel consumption, and that's also true in the United States. So that means weight reduction, need for lighter, stronger, and higher performance materials that are plastic. They want to lower the greenhouse gas emissions. So what they're trying to do is lower greenhouse gas emissions associated with their actual vehicle. And that means that those emissions statistics that I just gave you from our process actually translate and carry forward into the biomat as they're doing their life cycle analysis. They're integrating our data into theirs in order to show a reduced carbon footprint of the material itself. They also have regulations they're dealing with eliminating shipments to landfills. There's an 85% reduction in the EU that they're trying to maneuver around. There's also a concern about improving the air quality in a car's interior. So they need materials with no volatile organic compounds, no VOCs. There are regulations around there. And they're also wanting to replace substances that are considered toxic. So in phthalated plasticizers, using soft PVCs and the like. So here we are. We have this great technology. We're a demonstration scale. We're a startup. We've raised over $80 million in the last 3 years. Small company. Now we need to build. We need to build our commercial scale facility. Well, I was involved in the site selection process. I have the battle scars to prove it for BioAmber's commercial production. And I wanted to just go over today a little bit about, I think it's a great way to show sort of what the landscape is. When we first looked at the landscape, basically what we found was this incredibly fragmented policy that was really resulting and experienced through my own eyes delayed economic progress here in the United States. So we've got the 2012 Farm Bill, which still isn't passed. I'll talk more about that in a second. Various pieces of legislation floating out there, production tax credit being worked on but not passed, the investment tax credit being worked on but not passed, other ideas from think tanks as well as draft legislation floating out there in Congress, the Clean Energy Deployment Administration or Green Bank. And then we have some fragmented safety regulation from the Toxic Substances Control Act and the EPA. We have the USDA and the DOE. Their loan guarantee programs that are reserved exclusively for biofuels. We looked squirreled into all kinds of avenues to try to make sure that we could use the same loan guarantees, but we couldn't. We could really only count on just a few standard loan guarantees from the USDA that were available to other manufacturers. So we really came up with nothing. And what happens, in the U.S., as we've seen in other unrelated areas, is that where the federal government, is not sort of taking a long-term policy stance and devising comprehensive programming, the states really fill in because they recognize, and probably also because they feel the economic impact more immediately, they recognize industries like green chemistry and biotechnology as a real boon to their economy. So they fill in with other incentives. And I've listed, it looks like probably 16 or 17 there of different sorts. So when you think about a startup company kind of looking at North America and where to locate a plant, you can imagine it's not easy. And what we really found and discovered was, here I'll just take you through sort of an example of what has happened because of that. And while our competitors and ourselves even are looking overseas to build these large-scale facilities, we have the desire and we have this incredible advantage in the U.S. of a low-cost feedstock, the 95 dextrose, which could be used in the Midwest, but unfortunately, here's the situation. So if we take a look at this region, just Michigan as an example, here's a state with the sixth fastest growing GDP in the nation as of 2011, 337.4 billion, population of 9.8 million. So a strong economy, excellent ties to the auto industry, not unfamiliar with chemical activity and chemical manufacturing because of that tie to the auto industry. Right across the lake from Ontario, which has some of the largest chemical production in the world. And then you find that, well, across the border, that state, and because of the lack of federal incentives, is really pitted against an entire province of Canada. So Ontario, in contrast, is 40% of Canada's GDP, which is $638 billion. And it's got 40% of the Canadian population at 12.8 million. So you begin to see sort of this idea that, you know, there's a huge disparity in how the U.S. kind of approaches policy when industry-related policy in the green chemical industry, and how Canada does. And just from a geographic point of view, I like to point this out because people don't often realize or have a real solid sense of what a company is actually looking at in terms of when to locate. So a province like Ontario is going to have, you know, over $30 million worth of grants and zero interest loans to offer. The state of Michigan is not going to have that simply because they don't have the resources. So sadly, we did locate in Ontario. That's probably not too much of a surprise. And we're unable to, although we have our headquarters in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and, you know, still have the strong desire to build in the U.S. to capture that low-cost feedstock and be more cost-effective and competitive. So I hope that's helpful to sort of understand what their perspective is. Now, moving on to you know, what our sort of what my framework is, I guess, in terms of looking at strong policy and legislation in the U.S. Really, what is going to be the pathway to new markets in manufacturing? Because a lack of regulatory stability for chemicals in the U.S., it really continues to decrease consumer confidence because we don't have appropriate safety regulation. And I put safety first here because, you know, the three buckets that we look at are safety, open innovation, and incentives. Safety being the foundation for all chemical production. Safety is always first for any of us at BioAmber. Open innovation really being a management principle of ours to have a collaborative and open mindset in terms of speeding to market, and the incentives themselves, which we believe should be frugal, limited, but effective. So starting with that, the concept of safety is really important because that fundamentally continues to decrease consumer confidence and destabilize investment in the U.S. It does so much in the business atmosphere. Excuse me. Stifling innovation for safer products. It increases legal liability throughout the supply chain, and you can kind of hear my investment advisory perspective coming through in analyzing what businesses are going to succeed in our current 21st century economic climate, where we have to deal with climate change, we have to deal with increased insurance rates, we have to deal with volatile costs of electricity and energy. And, you know, on top of all of that, we're looking at a lack of adequate safety regulation in the U.S., and that's where the consumer base really becomes problematic. And as an example, the American Sustainable Business Council is an organization that has given voice to sustainable business owners in Washington and weighed in on several policy campaigns, I guess you'd say, and has really taken up chemicals as one of them. They did a poll of voters nationwide and found that 74% of U.S. voters, now this is a nonpartisan poll, and it was actually a collaboration between a Republican and a Democratic polling firm. They found that 74% of voters nationwide believe there's a serious threat posed to their health. Excuse me. A serious threat posed to their health due to exposure to toxic chemicals in day-to-day life. Now, to me, that's an astonishing finding. When you are talking about one of the largest markets in the world, and 74% of the voters in that market believe that there's a serious threat posed to your health, you know, there's got to be a radical step back by the entire industry to reorient themselves and provide a course correction. They also found in that same poll of when they polled business owners, over 550, which tended actually to be more Republican and small business owners, 93% strongly agreed that companies using chemicals of concern should disclose their presence to customers and the public. And that essentially says that most, if not all, small business owners believe in a precautionary principle, that we really shouldn't expose not only our businesses and the liability that goes along with it to chemicals of concern, but we shouldn't expose the public. So that gives you a little bit idea of why, you know, we think that safety legislation is really the foundation for spurring innovation and small business. So to give you an idea of the federal atmosphere, landscape on safety legislation, you've got, you know, the initial invention and use kind of moving from the left to the right in 1888. You know, first chemical engineering class at MIT was in 1888. In 1976, you had the Toxic Substance Control Act, and that grandfathered in 80,000 chemicals that were already in use. And really, there's no assurance of safety prior to production of entry into commerce, aside from the sometimes quite adequate safety testing that's done at the companies themselves. However, that's not transparent, so the consumer still doesn't understand what risks they're actually taking with those products in the marketplace. I call it ghost legislation, and you'll see why in just a second. And then we have, as a result of this lack of safety, again, we see this ad hoc regulatory environment where the states step in and they do their best. So 16 states have chemical regulation as a result, and 28 are considering, if not in the legislature right now, in the sessions right now. Chemicals are regulated by 9 different agencies and by 13 pieces of legislation. They also are regulated by guidelines, and then on top of that, there are safety standards for use in commerce. So you just take one substance, benzene, which is deemed a toxic substance. These are all of the regulations and legislation that regulate benzene. This is the result of not having that comprehensive federal safety regulation that we need. So when a company like ours comes along and we want to sort of announce to the world, hey, we're making these great alternatives, we're entering into the marketplace, we too have to deal with this sort of regulatory environment, and it's not fun. So when I have testified before congressional committees and the like, it has been for comprehensive chemical reform. The Safe Chemicals Act, which is Senator Lautenberg's safe safety chemical legislation, actually has a green chemistry section within it. I've reviewed it, and it's excellent, and it provides for new chemical alternatives to be expedited to market. This is something that's pretty critical since, you know, currently we're facing this long laundry list of different ways of regulating. So that's what I have on safety. So for that kind of component in that bucket, we do spend a fair amount of time focus on that and making sure that the legislation is supported in whatever way we can. We work with different organizations and the like to do that in order to have all of these great benefits that are listed right there. Now, as for open innovation, this is a little bit, the second bucket is a little bit of a little bit more amorphous. It's a little bit less data-driven. These are concepts that I've really developed because I've seen how restrictive our government has been compared to other governments in our policies. So open innovation is really a concept in policy, I believe, is taking an approach of looking at the benefits before we actually look at the technology. So, for example, where we have a technology like ours that's environmentally beneficial, you have no greenhouse gas emissions, we're using a low-cost, U.S.-advantaged feedstock. We have all of these kind of numerous benefits coming. The U.S. government is, for example, under the Renewable Energy Assistance Program, where we might find ourselves looking for a loan guarantee, dictates that, no, actually you have to be an existing technology that's energy efficient. So they're specifying in a very concrete way, with good intentions, trying to develop energy efficiency with an existing infrastructure and the existing supply chain. But going back to what I initially said, what we're really trying to do is systemic change. And what's so exciting about green chemistry is that as a production technology, we can start producing chemicals in a better way, but not only just producing them. We're actually changing the supply chain downstream to be safer. We're making the environment safer for workers within those production facilities. We're bringing economic prosperity and a new technology that's going to be in place for a number of years, so communities are being built on it. I've seen that firsthand. So what we want is open innovation rather than having it be technology focused. So, for example, we have a feedstock agnostic technology where there's issues about whether or not you're using a food feedstock and a bio-based chemical or material. Our technology is agnostic. What we're using is 95 dextrose currently from wheat because that's what's available in France. When we go to Ontario, we're going to use corn because that's what's available in the U.S. at that lowest cost. As soon as a company comes up with a way to make lignocellulosic feedstock cost-effective for us, we'll be able to transition to that. But unfortunately, the policy as it is now excludes any production of renewable chemicals with corn if we don't change the legislation in the correct manner. So those are the kinds of restrictions that really need to be looked at in the U.S. The government has kind of a strange way of being too specific about technologies rather than letting the market sort it out. I also believe that from the sustainability perspective and the socially responsible investment perspective that the foundational government resources, whether that's the Small Business Administration or the USDA or the DOE, need to have a balanced perspective on policy. They need to balance the benefit to the public commons, and that's to the environment or to the community in which any project is being built, with the health, safety, and welfare of citizens, and with commerce. And those three factors need to be of equal standing. Right now, we're clearly seeing, in terms of chemical safety regulation, an overemphasis on the effects of commerce rather than really taking a step back and saying, okay, how is this affecting the health, safety, and welfare of citizens, and what does that do to commerce? Because if we don't have an equal balance of all three of those things, any one of them will fall down. So what are the incentives that we want? Allie, you've been complaining for a number of minutes here. Incentives that we've pinpointed are kind of part of a larger effort. Michigan is so great, and I'm just so happy to be a part of this with the Michigan Green Chemistry Clearinghouse, because you've got a great senator. Senator Debbie Stabenow has stepped up as the head of the Agriculture Committee in the Senate and announced last year her Grow It Here, Make It Here initiative, which is a $5 billion proposal designed to dramatically expand bio-based manufacturing job creation, funded through what she described as reductions in subsidization of the oil industry, which makes sense. So among the provisions of her proposal is just, this is like kind of an overview of this list we have of incentives on the right. A 30% tax credit for manufacturers that install equipment to produce bio-based products, so an investment tax credit. Increasing the labeling opportunities for bio-based products, so that's in the Farm Bill, not the energy title, but in the BioPreferred program. An expansion and access to the USDA Biorefinery Loan Guarantee Program to include companies focused on bio-based products, which is huge. I mean, that really, these are all, we've pinpointed these because these are the game-changing incentives that will actually get a company like ours to locate a production facility in the U.S. And she's also added focus on bio-based product commercialization in the U.S., government's biomass research and development efforts. And that has U.S. Secretary of Agriculture Bill full support. You know, he acknowledged at the time she spearheaded this effort last summer that the bioproduct sector, it basically joins two of the most important economic engines for rural America, agriculture and manufacturing. And it's great that they get it, you know. He acknowledged that there's more than 3,100 companies across the country producing more than 25,000 bio-based products. I mean, this isn't just, you know, sort of like let's throw some money at some early stage R&D and see where it goes. This is actually happening. These products are in the market and they have labels, and it's here to stay. So it's only incumbent on us and on our legislation to really grab the mantle and make sure that we're in the forefront of this activity rather than just letting the states duke it out, you know, because that's a losing battle for sure. So really in conclusion, I hope this is giving you a good overview of sort of what a startup green chemical company thinks about policy and legislation. It might be a little bit different than the focus you've heard before, but we come at this from a pretty straightforward perspective and practical perspective. I think that safety is the foundation to any business and to a free marketplace. Open innovation, where the market sorts things out. You don't specifically exclude technologies or future technologies that you don't even know exist yet. And then targeted incentives are really, in the short term, what are going to spur green chemistry to commercial scale and integration. So thanks for your time today. I'm really happy to take questions and look forward to any comments or thoughts you might have.
Thanks so much, Allie. That was very interesting. We have a few questions, and I really want to encourage people to jump in and ask some more questions. There's one question that I'm not sure I understand. Maybe the questioner would like to elaborate. He says, how is California doing? And I'm wondering if that means relative to addressing some of the policy concerns that you've raised.
Well, I'm not sure I'm the best person to speak to exactly how California is doing. I can say from just a general perspective, I guess I can address that from a couple different perspectives. Sort of from a policy perspective, they're an absolute leader in their efforts with safety regulation on their own. I mean, they've had more legislation considered and enacted than most states. From the economic perspective, you know, they're in that they can do that because they're a very large market. California is a giant economic engine of its own, and they can command formulators and manufacturers to adjust their formulations to their market specifically. And so from that perspective, they're unique. But I still think that what they're doing is very brave and bold. But is that going to hurt choice in the consumer marketplace? I don't know. Is that going to discourage chemical manufacturers from putting their products into an American marketplace because they have to deal with California over there with a different regulation? I think it's more of it's just more fodder for this whole landscape, where they might be a mountain in the landscape. It's still a pretty bumpy one in terms of each state just trying to sort all of this out on their own. I think they're doing a good job, and I think they're doing a good job at communicating, especially through labeling with consumers and creating consumer awareness and transparency with their they're one of the few states that have made comprehensive chemical safety legislation.
Great. I just want to remind people that we won't be calling on you if you have your hand up, just because we are only taking questions in the box. So here's another question. What has BioAmber done to assess the human health and environmental safety of their product?
That's a great question. So we've done a lot. Succinic acid is actually used as a food and flavoring agent. So we have what's called GRAS, which is generally recognized as safe standing. For the specific testing that we've done and for specific regulatory hurdles that we've gone over, it depends on the country. So I can say that we've done the GRAS testing, that we're also considered a natural product. So we're non-toxic by our safety materials data sheet. Succinic acid is really like table salt. It's an inert chemical and non-reactive.
Does that answer the question of the questioner? If not, you can expound on it by answering another question if you want, asking another question. I actually have a question, Allie, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but what I think is so interesting about your presentation is that there seems to be, I'm trying to figure out what to call it, a dichotomy or a disconnect maybe between my understanding of what a lot of small businesses, and you alluded to this in your survey, in your discussion of the survey, the real interest that small businesses have in promoting comprehensive chemicals legislation in the U.S., and yet there seems to be from some of the trade organizations some real opposition to doing this, just in terms of what they're interested in seeing in or not seeing in that legislation. And I'm trying to understand, A, whether the small companies feel that they're being represented appropriately by their trade organizations, and secondly, what do you think accounts for this disconnect, and do you think that it has something to do with competitive advantage?
Let's see. There's a lot in that question.
Sorry.
It's okay. No, it's a good one. And it's absolutely true there is a disconnect there. I'll start sort of from the beginning on what the interest of the small businesses is in more safety regulation. If I wasn't clear. Small business is interested in having a voice in these discussions because they are the most affected economically to shifts in the marketplace. And whether that's a shift brought on by the economic climate now, where we're in the Great Recession, or whether it's a shift in kind of consumer consciousness because of a campaign for safer cosmetics. Whatever it is, the small business is the one that has the smaller margins and hurts more, right? So that direct interest is starting to be represented by organizations like the American Sustainable Business Council. So those businesses that are interested in sort of health and wellness, natural products, are starting to come together as a business voice in and of itself, just as the consumers on sort of that same that have the same sensibility are starting to come together. And what we're finding is that's a pretty strong segment of business. And then we're finding something further, which is it's nonpartisan. This is small business. And where the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has seen Nike drop out, Apple drop out, Microsoft drop out, all three of those companies specifically because of the U.S. Chamber's stance on climate change. You know, I would even say that, you know, some of the larger businesses are not represented by industry organizations at this point. Yet those industry organizations still exist and still persist to protect what they've always protected. Now, what we're seeing in small business is the Valley, the Business Alliance of Local and Living Economies. The American Sustainable Business Council represents 140,000 small businesses. They are an umbrella organization for organizations like Green America, which also has a number of businesses attached. They also represent Eileen Fisher, Seventh Generation. These are large companies that are making great headway. I guess, you know, on what we found in sort of being amid this time, which is a great time of transition, is that we stand right in between. We have very large chemical partners, Mitsubishi, Mitsui, Lanxess, companies like Faurecia, that are all connected to the incumbent chemical supply chain and trying to make a transition away. And it's not always going to be graceful, and it's not always going to be smooth. In fact, it's not smooth. This dichotomy is playing out in any number of areas. We've seen in the last year the American Chemistry Council attack LEED certification. And why are they attacking LEED certification? Because LEED, as an independent industry organization, has decided to take into account materials and chemicals in building and construction to account for greater, you know, certification points. So now they're taking, for example, formaldehyde in plywood under consideration. If you cannot get a point, of course, for using chemicals in building and construction materials. So where the incumbent industry organizations continue to kind of try to stall, LEED is a great example because LEED is not government. LEED is an industry organization, much like, you know, that is a group of small businesses and large businesses in one industry that has seen that this is really the way business is going. It you know, aside from green chemistry, you know, this is the way prospering, forward-thinking business is going because of 21st century business concerns of energy efficiency, of volatile costs in transportation, of supply chain management issues, of growing connectivity in social spheres for supply chain management and human rights issues. This is the way that business is going. And unfortunately, we see the chemical industry not taking that collective step back. And from what I've heard in Congress specifically about the disconnect, I'm talking to legislative officers a bit, they seem to see a disconnect as well, which is within companies, they seem to see that from kind of the VP, this is interesting, from the VP level down, there's a different tone to the conversation than from the VP level up. And where I think, this is totally anecdotal, so, forgive me. But you asked the question, Lynn, so I'm going to go for it. Where we see this sort of anecdotal evidence that between Republicans and Democrats, people pretty much have the same value system in terms of health and safety, in terms of innovation and moving business forward, and in terms of feeling prosperous economics that do not slight, that have like a well-balanced approach and are not at the expense of the public commons, of adequate social sort of structure and support of our economics. So I can't say what it is that makes some industry organizations fight against transparency and information or fight against health and safety, but it is happening. I've seen it firsthand, and it's up to all of us who are interested in transitioning the supply chain away from what it is now into something that's better. It may not be 100% better, but at least it's, at least we want to we just want to get steered in the right direction. I think that's what policy really does, is it helps sort of turn the boat in the right direction.
Great, thank you. I want to try to squeeze in. I mean, I could listen to this for a lot longer, but we have two other questions that I'd like to squeeze in here. This is a follow-up to the health and safety question. He says, I was partly getting at whether BioAmber has applied hazard assessment methods such as the green screen.
Okay, so we would be, we don't do a lot of application development. We are a supplier to a company that would be doing a green screen. So they would be assessing our company as to whether or not we would go through it. Now, we haven't had a customer yet who's developing a product that I know of use a green screen and come up with us. That may be the case, but I'm also not on that side of the business enough to know. I hope that clarifies. We would be considered an alternative ingredient to something that would be screened out.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And the last question that I have for the last 4 minutes is, how do you foresee issues with sustainable agriculture and future agriculture regulations fitting into the development of the bio-based chemical sector?
That's a great question. What we see now is there is a lot of concern about agricultural feedstocks being used for any number of products. We see that a lot because, for example, succinic acid is a food and flavoring. We are very much aware of genetically modified agricultural feedstocks as being a concern. Currently, we produce in Europe, so there's no genetically modified agricultural feedstocks being used, and even if there were, our production process doesn't result in any genetically modified material since it's a chemical. There are a few things happening. Pretty soon on our website in the sustainability section, you'll see a really great little project that we're sponsoring, which is with Ontario farmers who are trying to figure out the best way to harvest corn stover in order to process that for sugar. So there's active projects going on, all over the world, really, trying to figure out how to get that non-food, I hate to say non-food, the non-agricultural or the agricultural waste feedstock going. Sustainability in agriculture is incredibly important because it reduces the carbon footprint of the whole product. If you have organic sustainable farming practices, you're not only reducing energy, but you're also reducing the chemical use and fertilizers of that. Some companies have gone so far as to do sustainable offsets because, for example, NatureWorks is a great example. They, Stonyfield Farms, use their bio-based chemical for their yogurt cups and really wanted only sustainable farming practices used for the corn that they used in their PLA. And what NatureWorks did was they worked with a group called the Working Landscape, the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy in Minnesota, and they have a working landscape certificate where someone will go into a community and help to manage a sustainable farming practice to offset the amount of corn that you've used. The fact of the matter is now, the way that corn is harvested, there's no way to track what's sustainable and what is not. You're just pulling from the same, literally the same grain tower, so you can't tell if you're using sustainable or not. Maybe that just gives a little bit more insight into the complexity of the supply chain issues for sustainability on that side. But certainly I know that wasn't a definitive answer.
Well, that's okay. That was a great answer. And we're now at the end of our hours, so that went by very quickly. Thank you so much, Allie. Once again, we really appreciate you stepping in and giving us this great presentation. And I would like to remind people again to be sure to visit the websites that are on your screen right now, the Great Lakes Green Chemistry Network, the Michigan Green Chemistry Clearinghouse. There's a lot of information on these websites. You can see the schedule for the upcoming webinars and some of the news things that I've been that I announced today. And we are hopefully very soon also getting our links page back up, where you will find what we are trying to build, a very comprehensive page of links to all kinds of green chemistry organizations, both within the Great Lakes and beyond. So thank you again, everybody, and I hope that we will see you again next month. Have a good day. Bye-bye.